All right, the recording is on.
Kelsey, it seems like we can see that you've started screen sharing, but not the actual slides.
Oh, okay. Give me 1 second, y'all. Let me see. Why did that happen? Stop share. Let me try sharing again. Thank you for flagging that. Can y'all see the slides now? No. Okay. Give me a second. Gotta love it, y'all. I wonder if Zoom changed its sharing abilities. Let's try this one more time. I have one last theory. Thank you all for your patience. Okay, share screen, desktop too. How about now? Success! Okay, third time is a charm. My birthday is on the 3rd, not January 3rd, but so 3 is a lucky number. Cool, okay. The recording has started. And as always, if you need closed captioning, it's in the little box with the CC at the bottom of your page. If you see a little swirly in the chat, that's me chatting you. This is so it's easier to find things along the way. When we're in the large group, keep your mic off unless we're invited to come off mic. Drop your questions in the chat. This is going to be a really engaging session. As someone who started in politics and shifted to resource mobilizing, I know that policy and politics, particularly at a state level, can be really just like, what is happening? I don't understand. And I'm sure Melissa also feels the same way, because I know she has a bit of an untraditional path into politics. So I say all that to share, there are no bad questions, silly questions, dumb questions. Come ready to talk about this stuff. As I mentioned, session is recorded. As always, we love seeing your faces. It really helps myself and our presenters get an idea of what the energy is like in the room. And, please know that your kids, creatures, housemates, podmates, neighbors are all welcome in the space too. But if for some reason you don't want to be on camera today, we completely understand. And then as always, have something to take notes, because it's going to be pretty juicy that we get into this stuff. So the next piece, as always, is I invite you to listen deeply. I invite you to embrace discomfort and notice any tension that might arise. And I invite you to take risks and hold each other with compassion. We know that so many of these systems that we're trying to change or shift within our collective giving spaces and through our collective giving, they weren't built in a day. They're not going to be dismantled in a day. And it takes practice to really lean into the values of equity and justice, which is why it's so important for us to just sit with these invitations. Finally, I'm so excited to introduce Melissa, and she's going to introduce herself a little bit more. I've had the pleasure of working with Melissa now, I would say since I started at PHT about 2 years ago. And as someone who came from a political realm, the States Project in particular is one that I find a lot of inspiration in. And so I just can't stress enough to you all how excited I am for her to share her wisdom, for you all to be able to pick her brain a little bit, and for us to really think about what it can look like when collective givers lean in and decide to shift power within their states and within their democracy. And so with that, I'm actually going to stop my screen share, and I am going to invite Melissa to take the lead from here.
Thank you so much. And I apologize for my voice. I've just been talking a lot this week, but I feel okay. So don't feel bad for the way I feel. I don't feel sick. I've just lost my voice a little bit. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. As long as you can hear me, just know that this isn't what I normally sound like. I am going to start screen sharing, and I am not the most well-versed at using slides, but you can see my screen now. Yes, the agenda. Great. I'm going to put it on presenter view. Does that show you the slides? That it looks good?
Yes.
It looks great.
Great. Okay. So this is what we're going to talk about a little bit today. We're going to talk specifically about state power and the power of state legislatures, because that's where I work. And we're going to talk about how to work on shifting that power in our country, and then also how you can engage with your own elected officials and talk about issues that you care about and lean into some real advocacy within your communities. So I'm going to start with this. We at the States Project work specifically on state legislatures, and the way that I got involved in this is that in December of 2016, I don't know if you all remember what happened in November of 2016, but there was a big national event that year, and I was a children's book author at that point in time. I was writing young adult and middle grade novels. But I was lucky enough to attend a holiday party in December of 2016 where I heard a state legislator speak. I was very worried about a lot of issues that I cared a lot about, including public education and healthcare and voting rights and all of these things that were coming to mind. And I learned at this holiday party in December of 2016 from a New York State senator that everything that I was worried about and everything that I cared about was really being decided in state capitals and not in Washington, D.C. From education funding to environmental policy to healthcare to civil rights to voting rights. And I started connecting the dots on some things that hadn't made sense to me in the past. So things like the bathroom bills, which started passing in my home state of North Carolina. I started to realize, like, okay, that was people in Raleigh who did that. And things like stand your ground gun laws, which passed in Tallahassee and then passed in 26 other states. I started to recognize, okay, those were lawmakers in Florida. I don't know any of their names. I'm not paying attention to that. And things like the Flint, Michigan water crisis, I started to recognize, okay, that's a Lansing problem, not a Washington, D.C. problem. And all of those things happened under an Obama presidency. And I started to recognize that there were real power centers in state capitals that I had certainly not been paying attention to. And I didn't know who went to Albany for me. If you had asked me that night who my state senator was, I would have said, don't I have two, Schumer and Gillibrand? But those are my federal senators. And I started to realize as I began talking to other people that no one in my network really knew who went to their state capitals for them. And that these are the people who are deciding on the kitchen table issues that we all care so much about, and who also have power over the federal level, because they're the ones who decide who can vote and when and how, and because they draw the district lines that decide who goes to Congress. So I started looking at the state level specifically, and I got together with some other children's book authors, and we started what we called a giving circle. We didn't know much about giving circles or what they did or the big, history and movement behind them. But we started a political giving circle to shift power in a state chamber. And later that summer, that New York State senator who we'd heard speak, Daniel Squadron, resigned from the New York State Senate to start the States Project to focus exclusively on shifting power in state legislatures. And our giving circle was the first of many, many giving circles to come, who went in with the States Project to spend electoral dollars on working on shifting power and changing majorities. So this is where the States Project works, focusing on target districts in states to shift power by either flipping a majority, defending against a right-wing supermajority, breaking a right-wing supermajority, or protecting a vulnerable majority that we feel is under threat. So it's about investing in tipping point districts, getting folks over the line to win their elections. And it's never about supporting single candidates. It's about supporting the number of districts needed to shift power, because that's really what we're after. And the reason This has given me a lot of hope, and connects to the advocacy that I want to do in my life, is because state legislatures really are meant to be laboratories for democracy. They're meant to be marriage equality going from state to federal, or healthcare going from Hawaii to Massachusetts to becoming the Affordable Care Act. And they can be that. But we have too many state capitals right now that are laboratories for bans on abortion and bans on full health care for trans kids, and keeping people from voting. So we have to shift power to reflect our values. And the reason why shifting power is so important is because it is all about building majorities. One piece of news that really inspired my giving circle is that it is often cheaper to change the balance of power in an entire state chamber than it is to win a single competitive congressional seat. Congressional races cost millions and millions of dollars, and state legislative races don't. They're where the right wing's been building power for a very long time. There's a huge return on investment with state legislative races. And building majorities means that we're shifting the issues and also who's in power. So when we work to shift power in a state chamber, like I said, we're not just shifting a majority, but we're also changing who's at the decision table. When we have state lawmakers who are more representative of the diversity in their state, gaining governmental power to set an agenda, that's real change. And this is the kind of, we're looking at Michigan as a case study. In 2022, we had dozens of giving circles focused on helping us shift power both in the Michigan Senate and in the Michigan House. We ended up winning both chambers, each by fewer than 400 votes. And when that power shift happened, this is what the majority change looked like demographically. I'm just going to go through it because it honestly gives me a little bit of a chill. So the Senate majority went from 14% women to 55% women, 0% BIPOC folks to 35% BIPOC folks, 0% LGBTQ plus folks to 5% LGBTQ plus. And in the House, those numbers are 25% women to 59% women, 0% BIPOC to 32% BIPOC, and 0% LGBTQ plus to 11% LGBTQ plus. Now, when the demographics of who is holding power change in a state capital, policies change. And policy priorities changing means that people are able to deliver for the folks that they're representing. And it is a more representative democracy. The next slide that we're going to is still a case study on Michigan, because power shifts lead to policy shifts. And this gets to the issues that we all care about, because this isn't about winning elections. That's not an end game. It's a means to an end. This is about policy change. This is about people's lives improving at a structural level, not one community by one community, but an entire state shifting policy. So the state's project's electoral work in Michigan over the past 3 cycles, I just made it sound like we did it overnight in 2022. We've been in Michigan since 2018, shifting 6 seats in 2018, holding that ground in a rough 2020. And holding that ground, I will be honest, didn't feel like winning to me in 2020, but in 2022, it sure did, because we won a 1-seat majority in each chamber. And if all that ground hadn't been held in 2020, we wouldn't have been able to flip things in 2022. So over the past 3 cycles, the state's project electoral work helped fuel these new majorities. And those state lawmakers took office in January, and they've really delivered results for working families in record time. And to understand the power of the majorities, I just show this slide to illustrate what is prioritized this session versus the agenda enacted by the right wing when they first won in 2010. So just looking at these, higher taxes for working families and retirees versus lower taxes for working families and retirees, prioritizing special interests with those so-called right to work laws versus prioritizing workers by giving them back their power to unionize, rolling back LGBTQ plus rights to safeguarding them, restricting abortion access, increasing barriers to protecting, repealing the 1931 statutes that went into effect when the Dobbs decision came down. So these are real stark differences, and it shows how much can shift when majorities shift. So that's really important. So getting involved in elections and shifting power to majorities that are focused on improving people's lives with good policy is one way to bring advocacy to a way that folks are already organizing. All of you all who are working with giving circles already have people who have things that they care about, who are activated and trying to make change. And in my experience doing this kind of donor organizing, giving circle creation in the political sphere, what it is for me is that every giving circle, I think that does a project with the States Project is really turning on a porch light for strategic foundational giving, because especially as we head into a 2024, everyone is going to be trying to figure out how they can have an impact on politics. And there's going to be a lot of emotional giving that happens here, there, and everywhere, and reactive giving that happens. But we know that that kind of giving isn't strategic. But collective giving in the way that giving circles organize is always strategic. That's the point of it. It's thought through, it's planned, it's the math problem that brings impact. And so this is one of the reasons why I love working with political giving circles, to focus on these 50 mini congresses that we've ignored for a really long time. So I'm going to move on a little bit to talk about policy, because of course, as I mentioned earlier, winning these elections is one piece of getting to good policy outcomes in these states, which is really what changes people's lives. So as the slide says, you can have a huge impact in your state. 100 people in a room can make an issue a primary agenda item for a legislature. Now, when folks think about state lawmakers, state House reps and state senators, the picture that might come to mind immediately is probably a congressperson, someone who's in DC. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about people who have local offices, probably on your main street, probably near you. They don't get that many phone calls. They don't get that many visitors. They will take your meeting. And showing up with 3 or 4 people will make your issue item really important to them, because this is still small, this is still local. And the beauty of this, though, is that these people have real power if they're serving in the majority. So if you have a state lawmaker who is serving in the majority in your state, and you have an issue that you care about, I'm going to talk a little bit about some tactics to make that a priority for them. The first one is becoming an expert. No big deal, right? That sounds easy. No, it does not sound easy. But I do think that as folks who've been involved with giving circles, we all have issues that we care about, maybe focus areas for our giving. And those things are probably things that you are already somewhat knowledgeable about. So digging into maybe one particular policy that you're interested in can be a way to engage a state lawmaker and engage a state majority and actually shift policy over a little bit of time. So becoming an expert means fully reading and understanding a policy that you're focusing on, doing your research to read around that policy, read any media coverage of that policy, in popular press, policy publications, how is it covered on the news, if it's something that pops up in the news, identifying some advocacy organizations who might align with your efforts, who are already working on that type of policy work, so that you can talk to them and think about how to push things forward. And then the other piece is identify likely opposition groups to the policy that you're thinking about. Think about it from all angles and think about it from the political way that your representative might think about it. Who's going to come out and say, no, no, no? Who's going to try to stop this? The second step is to develop a media plan. I know this all sounds a little daunting, but these are really steps that people, especially people who already organize groups of people like you all do, can really take. So developing a media plan might look like brainstorming 4 to 6 events over a year. Events meaning maybe one op-ed in a local newspaper, maybe a press conference where folks are coming together. You got 3 or 4 people who say, I care about this issue. I'm going to talk to my neighbors. We're going to gather and invite our state representative to come stand with us. They love a press conference. I'm telling you, local representatives love a press conference. You could also organize a rally for the issue. And even if you got 10 to 15 folks to show up, that shows movement. Like, this isn't about organizing a 1,000,000-woman march. This is about getting a collected group of people to come together and move something forward. And that can be a small group for this type of action. Identifying target media outlets to cover anything that you're doing, the local newspaper, local TV, any radio, political blogs, anywhere where you can get a little bit of traction for the op-ed, a little bit of traction for a gathering that you've held. That can be a way to spread the word, to get it into the zeitgeist. And remember, I'm talking locally, not nationally, not thinking about booking a spot on CNN, but thinking more like, the local news runs all the time and they need things to cover. I've got an op-ed, I've got a couple of tools to hand to them to help them cover this issue. Social media, obviously. Of assets that you want to build as well, meaning someone who can be a spokesperson, a citizen spokesperson for the issue, legislative allies. So in addition to going to your own representative, talking to them about, hey, who else do you serve with who might get on board for this as well? And can I meet with them and try to organize some people in their legislative district? Because of course, the more people you can bring together on an issue, the better. Also, citizen storytellers. This is my favorite one. This is something where if you're working on an issue like, I'm actually going to give an example on the next slide of universal maternal home visiting, right? It's a state policy that's passed in a couple of states that has really incredible outcomes for the states where it's passed, and that it's basically a plan to have home visits for expecting mothers all the way through the first year of their children's lives on a state level. It changes educational outcomes, it changes poverty outcomes, it changes health outcomes, all with a plan that is just kind of a single intervention. In the case of that policy, a citizen storyteller would be someone who struggled when they had a child and did not have support, healthcare support prenatally, childcare support post birth, that kind of thing, and what kind of outcomes. And then someone who did have that support. So people to tell the "it happened to me" story, or I'm an example of what happens when we don't have this policy, and then maybe I'm an example of someone who benefited from something like this. Those storytellers are really powerful, and they can almost always be found within your community. And that's a really great way to engage more people. And then another asset might be some experts. So you might want some folks who have passed this policy before, who have written about this policy, who have studied the impacts. The third thing is to develop a lawmaker's push plan. Now, you've already met with your local rep, hopefully, and you also want to think about how to convince them beyond that 1 meeting or 2 meetings that there's a bunch of people thinking about this in your district. So whether that's organizing an email campaign, 10 to 20 friends saying, hey, I've written a sample email and our representative is this person. And if you care about this issue, would you send this email to them too, so that they know there are a lot of people thinking about this issue in my district and I can engage on this. Another in-person meeting where you bring more people to that state representative's office. One where you bring some young people. If you're engaging the teenagers in your community, if you're engaging college kids in your community, that is something that every lawmaker is interested in doing. And in getting credit for doing, right? Engaging the youth, getting people involved. And then identifying target lawmakers in your state in addition to your own representative. So who are the leaders in your state house? Who are potential champion lawmakers for your issue? Maybe they have some great public votes on issues that are very much in line with the issue that you're talking about. Maybe they have introduced this issue in the past and you can meet with them about why it hasn't gone through yet or what the roadblocks have been. Believe me when I say that state lawmakers are interested in being engaged by folks in this way. It is absolutely a plus for folks to be leading on issues that people are talking about. And then creating a timeline for how you want to engage throughout the year on this issue and mapping out a few key visits to the state capitol, which is, I think by design, often in a place that not that many people go. I don't know if you all have noticed that in most states, state capitals are not the main city. They're often tucked away somewhere else. And that is certainly by design in a lot of cases. But visits to the state capitol can be really impactful. And if you did 2 or 3 of those in a year and got one bus load full of people to go up and kind of drive and talk about this issue and stand in the rotunda and talk to lawmakers as they're going into session, that is something that can put an issue on the map, put an issue on the agenda. So these are the kinds of actions that you can map out if you'd like to think about policy engagement. Oh, there we go. This is one example of a resource for state lawmakers that the States Project provides. So we actually have, the States Project has a policy library. It is designed for state lawmakers to use because we have a whole staff that supports state lawmakers to pass popular policies that improve lives. It is also on our website and something that regular folks can engage with. And so I do encourage folks to look at it. This is the example that I just discussed, universal home visiting for new families. You'll see that in our policy library, it shows which states a law like this has passed, which states has it been introduced in but not yet passed. And you can click into those states and see the versions of those laws that have been introduced or passed. They're, of course, slightly different state to state. And then there's also, you see jump to model policy. There are also model bills in this policy library. So if you have, for example, a giving circle that's focused on investing in children or something like that, there are policies in our library that move the needle on investing in children, on improving outcomes for children. And there are actually model bills. And those types of model policies can be brought to state lawmakers and say, hey, is this something we can look at working on in our state? And it's something that people can engage with very tangibly with state lawmakers. Now, I'm going to end and I'm going to wrap up, and I would love to have a discussion, take questions. My voice is actually holding up pretty well. So thank you for bearing with me. But I want to say this. It is incredibly important that that when we are thinking about the changes that we want to see, we look beyond the federal government for those changes. It is really important to engage locally. And I want to reiterate the reason why I am particularly focused on state legislatures. It is because state legislatures have power over all the kitchen table issues domestically that are on our minds on a regular basis. And they have a unique lever of power over the federal level as well. Their power swings both ways. It is an incredibly dynamic power center. I like to sort of end with a trifecta, which is if you care about Congress, you should care about state legislatures because they draw the district lines that decide who goes to Congress. If you care about the Supreme Court and you think about what they're doing, you should care about state legislatures because the Supreme Court doesn't write laws. They rule on laws, many of which are coming out of state legislatures. It was a Mississippi law that took down Roe. And if that one hadn't done it, there were 16 other states that had drawn up abortion bans specifically to rise up and challenge Roe at the Supreme Court level. And if you care about the presidency, you should care about state legislatures because not only do they decide who can vote and how and when to purge the rolls and when to close voting places, but also because there have been real shenanigans by the right wing to work on stealing the presidency through state legislative majorities. That is something we saw in 2020 with the appointment of false slates of electors. And protecting free and fair elections in this country runs directly through state legislative majorities. They are not easy to pay attention to. There are over 7,000 state lawmakers in this country. It is very hard to figure out how to zero in and make an impact on shifting power. That is what the States Project does. And that is what we guide our giving circles who do political years with us to do. And we do it because we believe that state legislatures are the strongest force for change in our country. And we do it because we want to see policy outcomes that improve people's lives. And I think that everyone here is really focused on that type of change. So I hope folks will consider some advocacy, some political work, and these types of elements with their giving circles. So thanks for bearing with my voice. This was my last slide. I'm going to stop my share because I would love to engage with you all and answer some questions.
Melissa, we already have 3 questions in the chat, 2 of which are connected, and I'll share those with you right now. So the first question that we got while you were presenting was wanting to know a little bit more about the States Project and if you all were categorized as a PAC. And then there was a follow-up question to that where folks were wondering if these political giving circles that you all partner with and work with are PACs or 501c3s or 501c4s. So just talking a bit more about that structure.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Giving Circles program raises PAC dollars. Yes. So, the States Project's PAC is called the PAC for America's Future. And Giving Circles are giving to that PAC under the States Project. Now, our promise to Giving Circles is that 100% of the amount raised goes out the door to the state that the Giving Circles choose from our target list of states. The States Project does an analysis every year to figure out which states we think it's possible to shift power in or to protect or that need protecting. And Giving Circles choose which state they'd like to target. And there's a website. We use Grapevine. I'm sure some of you are familiar with Grapevine as our Giving Circle platform. So everyone has a Grapevine page that gets connected to the States Project's PAC. And the dollars raised go into that page for their Giving Circle. And then they choose the state that they'd like to target from our list of targets. And I'll share something in the chat that shows our list of 2024 targets so far. But it is PAC dollars. It is not tax deductible. And that's certainly, that's part of how we work because we do work on the hard side. We work with campaigns and state caucuses. So it is direct political giving and it is hard side money.
Thank you for that. And I just want folks to know that anybody who's like hearing the word PAC or hard money and you're like, oh my God, I don't know what that is. We actually had a whole entire session prior to Melissa joining about how money moves through political institutions, which I'll make sure to link in our follow-up email so you can really see how our series all ties together. And then one of the follow-up questions that popped up in the chat was wondering if you knew of any organizations doing similar work in Canada.
Oh my gosh.
I know.
I don't, but I love that question. Um, I don't know of any doing similar work in Canada, but I hope there are some. And it makes me want to look into it, but I'm sorry I don't right now.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm in the same boat. So I'm going to actually ask a question right now because the former policy analyst in me is really curious. Um, so I'm just going to share my screen real quick. And everybody can let me know if you can see it. And Melissa, if you're not quite the right person to ask this question, that's totally fine.
Yeah.
For folks looking at y'all's policy library, one of the things that I'm noticing is like here, if I'm in Massachusetts and I'm looking at your different topic areas, I'm noticing the ranking. The ranking makes sense to me. It's out of the 50 states, I would imagine. Yes? Okay, I'm seeing you nod yes. What is confusing me a little bit is like the 18 out of 100. What does that mean?
I actually don't know. And I'm sorry that I am not
That's
on the
okay.
policy team and I'm not the person to ask about this. And
That's okay.
also I will add like this site is public because we want everything to be really transparent. It's also like for state lawmakers who are taught how to use it. So it's a little bit like weedsy.
That's
Um,
super real.
yes, but I will find out for you because I'm actually curious too. I don't know what that number indicates.
Great.
But it is
And
kind of interesting to see where certain states are ranking, right? And it geolocates you. So it knows.
yeah,
Yeah.
it immediately put me in Massachusetts and I was like, oh snap, here I am. Okay, y'all. What other questions are coming up? I certainly have plenty that I can ask Melissa, but we want to hear from you all as audience members and those of you in the collective giving and philanthropic space. What are you sitting with from this session? Okay, here we go. How does the States Project identify candidates to support and target states? And I would also name too, just for everyone, as we're doing this Q&A, please feel free to just come off mute and ask questions as you like.
Yeah. So the way that we do it, we're pretty district first in terms of our analysis. So we do a 99 state chamber analysis every cycle, and it's 99 because Nebraska is unicameral. Nebraska doesn't have a state house and a state senate; they just have one state chamber, so that's why it's 99. But we look at the states where we see a possible shift via the districts. And so we do a district analysis that includes things like, is this a district where, you know, someone has won statewide, but there's still a right-wing candidate holding power in the district. Like we see indicators that someone could win the district, but hasn't yet. And then we figure out, are there enough districts like that to actually shift power? And so we map the districts first, which is really helpful because in these races, filing deadlines happen in the spring or even sometimes summer of an election year. And then primaries happen in the summer of an election year. And so if we were wholly candidate focused, the dollars that we spend would come in really, really late. And that's really not how we work. We work well ahead of time to help the state caucus. That's the entity in the state that's exclusively focused on the legislature. There's often a state party, there's always a state party. The state party focuses mostly on top of the ticket races, governor's races, secretaries of state, attorneys general. Those races get a lot of attention in statewide organizing. And there's sometimes a trickle down theory about, well, this will hit state leg too. We don't believe in trickle down theories, and we think that state legislatures deserve their own bottom up focus. And so we work with the state caucuses. We align on target districts with the state caucuses. We make sure that they have the staff that they need in place so that when folks start running in these districts and when people emerge from primaries, there's already a support system in place and there's already a plan to win these districts. Now, I will say once we know who has filed, we interview all the candidates in the target districts where we think we need to be to shift power, to check for values alignment, to make sure we think they're a good fit for the district. We align with the caucus on that. And then once folks, it's usually post-primary, once folks emerge from the primary is when we will give direct to candidate contributions where allowable, and also where we always say we bring more dollars and more data. We bring a lot of data-based tactics to these races. And those include things like doing ad testing for the ad buys that they're doing within their local districts, focusing on local press, having someone who is hired with the state caucuses to get these folks local press coverage. That can be everything from a local newspaper to a church bulletin to a neighborhood rag, because each name recognition touch for these people is really important. And then the third thing is we put a very particular lens on candidate door knocking. And by that, I mean the candidate themselves knocking on doors. We incentivize that and talk about that as much as possible, because we are in these districts that are very close, and field teams are great for get out the vote, but the candidate is the persuasion knock. So that's another lens that we do. Sorry, I'm getting like deep in the weeds on our tactics, but we identify districts first. Then we make sure the candidates who are running in those tipping point districts are aligned. And then we kind of move forward and are supporting them even well ahead of their campaigns even getting started, if that's helpful.
Thank you. What other questions do folks have? Oh, this is super helpful.
That's great. And yes, I'm sorry about Florida. We don't see a path right now to shifting power in Florida, or we would be there. And in a world of unlimited resources, we would be in every state, of course, building for the long game, because this is a long game in many states, and we do not want to feel like states are being left behind. We also, I will say, feel like we're in a bit of a democracy on the brink moment. And so we need to go for as many power shifts as possible that can happen in the near future, and certainly hope to expand and be everywhere trying to elect majorities that are focused on improving lives in the future.
What other questions do folks have? Oh, can you share a link to the political giving circles you partner with? Love to learn more about them and get engaged with those in my local community. Love that, Guff. But I also think too, that leads to a really good question, Melissa, of like, one of the things that I hear as the coordinator of this series is like, folks are really interested in systems change. They're really interested in politics. And sometimes what we're finding through these big groundbreaking news events that are on everybody's mind is that's where we start to see cultural differences and political differences between giving circle members. And what you might find is that, oh, my giving circle actually isn't the place for this kind of political giving. And I'm curious to know, what kind of advice would you give to individuals who are feeling this way? How would you recommend folks navigating these conversations? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing for me because, of course, most of the giving circles that I work with started as political giving circles. So they all formed in alignment. I often find that folks who have maybe charitable giving circles are, when they do something with the state's project, it's like a little offshoot. It's like off to the side. It's like me and these 3 other people from the giving circle, and then our different communities engaging, which is totally fine. But I think something that's important to point out, and you may have noticed from the way that I've been talking, is like, the state's project, I'm going to say this phrase again, this could be a drinking game for everybody. The state's project is about electing majorities that are focused on improving people's lives. Now, that is a real value statement. And if you do tap into our policy library, you'll see that there are 7 broad goals in there. They're things that really any human would nod their heads at. They are empowering people over special interests, investing in children, clean air and water, those types of things. And under those values are goals. They're goals that we'd like every state to try to reach by 2030. Those goals are things like ending hunger for 100% of households, ending mass incarceration in your state. And under those goals are the model bills that we talked about. They are bills and policies that can move states incrementally closer to achieving those bigger goals. And we really are about passing those types of policies. And if people want to come together in bipartisan ways to pass those policies, we will support, our policy team supports that. If people want to come together and build coalitions to support those policies, great. What we want is majority of lawmakers who are voting to improve people's lives and are moving things forward in their states. So I think that there is a way to talk about shared values that is often very, and kind of an organic part of a giving circle is having shared values. And I know that politics is very, very sticky right now. But I think when we frame things in that way, it's an easier way to approach people, bring them along. And I will also say there's no shame in saying, like, this seems like it'd be cool for me, but not everyone in my giving circle. And I'll do a side project with some other friends, because that is certainly something that I've seen as well.
Amazing. I saw a lot of folks come off or back onto camera. And so I'm wondering if those folks who have hopped on camera have a question for Melissa as well. Okay, hearing none, I'm going to continue with my questioning because I think you just have so many resources. So one of the big things that I've seen in policy work is, exactly what you said about even the state legislatures being located in, areas where folks might not even visit. For some of you, depending on what state you're in, you might be surprised to know that all of our state governments do not look the same. They don't all look like the federal government. I remember being a policy student and learning that I think it's Alaska meets for like 2-3 months every 2 years, and that's their legislative cycle, right? So for folks who are like just starting to dip their toe into this world of state government, and they are like just feeling completely overwhelmed and daunted, what are some of the pieces of advice that you would have, or are there national groups that you would highlight that you say, oh, they do a really great job of getting into the weeds of each state, or things like that? I recognize that usually there's specific groups per state, but since this is everybody's all over.
Yeah. So a couple of things. I mean, I feel like I've been in grad school for state ledge for the past few years. I've learned basically everything that I've said today over the past few years. I had no knowledge of this before. As I said, I didn't know who went to Albany for me in 2016. And it is really a Wild West. In 40 out of the 50 states, being a state legislator is a part-time job. It pays very little. In most states, less than $20,000 a year. You have to take time off from your other job, which you must have because, like I said, it doesn't pay much, to go to a state capitol for a legislative session. And we used to have a sign on our wall that said, not where the glamour is, just where the power is, because there's absolutely no glamour in being a state legislator. Most of your constituents won't know who you are. And, in pop culture, it's sometimes a joke. I remember there was a storyline on The Office where Angela was dating a state senator and she kept saying, well, I'm meeting the senator for dinner. And someone would always say, state senator. And, it was like it was a laugh line. So, it really is this citizen legislature of folks who often don't have staff and are part-time workers. And these are the people who are deciding whether women have full health care in a state. These are the people who are deciding whether, since the Affordable Care Act, Medicaid has been expanded or not. These are the people who are deciding public education funding. These are the people who are deciding, you know, voting rights. It's honestly wild how much power state legislatures have. And even when the federal government does things like, for example, the COVID relief funds, it's the state governments that decide how that is spent, how laws are implemented. You know, Alabama spent a lot of those COVID relief funds on private prisons. That was a prioritization that their state government made. So when we focus on this, we have to understand both how much power it has, but also how much, you know, how little resourced it is in most states. I will say that in each state, there are like policy organizations that work within the state. There are you know, there are advocacy groups that work within the state. Those are certainly folks to get connected with if you want to engage locally. And I really do, I said it before, but I really do recommend meeting with your state representative, becoming someone who knows them. It can be a very powerful relationship to have because of, like I said, how much outsized power they have and how little engagement they often have with folks. So I think that's a good place to start, honestly, straight to the source, your actual representative themselves. But if you are interested in, you know, where is change possible, I do think that that's really what the States Project does, is we look at all the places where we think change and power shifts are possible, and we identify like the specific ways in to make those changes happen.
Awesome. We have another question in the chat, and this one's a hefty one, so get ready.
Yeah.
Can you give examples of bi/multi-partisan initiatives that you've led or have been part of the modeled way for building bridges across differences, especially across party lines? In this polarized time, it feels like it's out of reach. And who is doing this well? What advice would you have to help us build those bridges?
Yeah. So one example of of electoral work that we've done is Alaska. We're talking about Alaska a lot today, which I feel like doesn't often get much play, so excited for them. In Alaska, we actually have supported a bipartisan coalition. They vote together to stand against the right-wing policies of a governor who wants to defund public education and deforest the state. And that coalition is what is blocking those policies. And it's something that, you know, we wanted to support. So that is one example of that. I do think that, you know, going back to that values-based language and conversation is a good place to start. And I mentioned our policy library has kind of those 7 broad goals. They really are meant to bring people together. They really are meant to say, like, we're more closely aligned than the national news would have us think. And it gives me a lot of hope to work at this level, because when we're involved in these elections, which really do remain local elections, and we're in these tipping point districts, what we see as candidates go door to door and knock is that standing on someone's porch and talking to them, not about like what's people are arguing about on the national news, but about like the cracks in their sidewalk and the grass on their softball field and what's happening down at the local school. That type of conversation and exchange, whether they're in different parties or not, is the type of thing that makes a human see a human. And when we've done this door knocking, these door knocking initiatives, we really have seen that that can be a huge difference maker. When we won new majorities in 2022, Michigan, again, flipped by fewer than 400 votes in each chamber. Minnesota flipped by under 200 votes in the state Senate. In Pennsylvania, the state House flipped by 63 votes. So this is the kind of thing that gives me a lot of hope that that person-to-person talking cuts through those party lines, especially when we're talking about our local communities, the things that we want for all of our kids, you know, and the resources that we want in our lives, you know, not in our head spaces where everyone's arguing over things that aren't really tangible. Keeping it local, keeping it tangible is something that gives me a lot of hope. It's what a lot of our candidates do when they're talking to voters. And it's what I would encourage everyone to do when talking to people, person to person, because I think that values connection is the most important part.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And I want to be mindful of your voice, Melissa. So we're right at 4:30. I know it's holding out, but I want to open up the space for one last question if it's there. If it's not, I think we can give Melissa's voice a break. And while y'all ideate on that, just one thing that I would love to uplift that Melissa shared around conversations, right, is when you're talking about policies, there are ways to talk about policies that are not rooted in Democrat, Republican. And I'm going to share a story of actually a ballot initiative that I worked on in 2018 in Massachusetts. And so I'm actually going to remove your spotlight, Melissa, so it can be all of us in a conversation. So for those of you that don't know, but I would imagine many of you do, because Massachusetts has a reputation, we're known as really progressive state. And as someone who's a resident of Massachusetts, we are progressive as it relates to many of our peer states, but we also have some pretty big conservatism in our state overall. And one thing that I'll name is we are a state legislature that is predominantly Democrat, right? So in theory, partisanship maybe shouldn't be a large issue. But in 2018, we saw a ballot initiative to try to repeal the rights of transgender individuals to public accommodation spaces. And so when you hear public accommodations, what you want to think about is restaurants, libraries, public restrooms, things like that. And essentially, the ballot initiative said that you would have to use public restrooms based off of your assigned biological sex. And so when we were doing that canvassing work, one, we didn't just come up to folks and say, hey, vote, yeah, like vote to support upholding trans rights. We didn't say, you know, Democrats believe this. What we really got to is exactly what Melissa's talking about and the heart issues. So when we were on the doors, we would ask things like, have you ever met a trans person before? Sometimes folks would say yes. A lot of the times, folks would say no. And that was a space for us to then have a conversation about why it mattered to us personally and why we were door knocking. And so when you go to the heart of an issue and make it personal, rather than focusing on the policy or who pushed it forward, who's pushing against it, that's where you can really start to see shifts. And so, for example, for me, when I was on the doors, a lot of the conversations stemmed around people who I love most in my life, people who have been in my life for decades, and then sharing what their life would look like if this bill passed. And even for someone who might look at me and say, I still don't understand the transgender thing, air quotes, it was something where we could talk about accessing a bathroom and feeling safe in that bathroom. That was something that the folks on the doors were much more likely to understand. And so sitting in that kind of space and really thinking about how to make these conversations more personal is just huge, 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 huge and shifting. And for those of you interested in the example that I shared, the tactic that is being described there is called deep canvassing. If you look it up, you can learn a lot about it. There's a couple groups that are working on that. It's a really well-researched tactic, but it's also a new tactic. It's something that a lot of political organizations are shifting towards because often it's very resource heavy, which speaks to why we need to channel money into ballot initiatives, elected officials, things like that, because it takes time to talk to people. Who knew? I'm sure all of you did. So Final offering, any last question before we wrap up for today?
Hi there. I had a question precisely about that, about whether any of the funds from the giving circles go to organizing frontline power building groups. I think maybe yes, but sometimes there's so many different funds and so many different projects. I think I'm thinking about State Voices, which is a slightly different one. Thanks, Melissa.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have we have worked with organizing groups in certain states in the past. One of the challenges, and actually, if any of you all know of organizing groups or have worked with them who do this, let me know. One of our challenges is that we find that a lot of organizing groups are funded to work statewide. So they're funded to work on winning statewide, winning, at the very top of the ticket, getting out the vote statewide, that type of thing. And because we are so laser focused on small and target districts, we often don't have an overlap in maps with organizing groups. I would love to have an overlap in maps with organizing groups. I am actually like on the hunt for groups that are willing to map with us and organize by state ledge district to win state legislative power. Because one of the things that I see so often is Georgia is actually a great example of it. There are incredible groups working on the ground in Georgia. The organizing of those groups made it possible for Biden to win at the top of the ticket, for Democrats to win a couple of those Senate seats. At the same time, the organizing hasn't been done by targeted state ledge district. So there are still right-wing supermajorities running Atlanta. And that means that the state has the power to limit voting further, to close more polling places, to purge more people from the rolls, so that those statewide victories that we've seen get less and less likely until we shift power in a state capital. So sometimes we have worked with organizing groups when they can target specifically with us, but too often we haven't been able to find those partners, and we would love to find more, especially to work with the state caucuses. Yeah, so.
Ooh, it
Thanks.
sounds like we have a connection being made. So that's really exciting.
Yes, I'm putting my email in the chat too, which I meant to do earlier. So please, if you'd like to contact me, do.
And Melissa is a delight to have a one-on-one with. I can vouch as someone who's had a couple one-on-ones with Melissa. And so with that, I want to thank you all for coming today for this intimate session to really learn about Advocacy 101. One thing that I'll mention is our last 101 session had to be canceled. So keep your eyes peeled, because what we're going to be doing is recording that session and we'll be sending it out. It has not been recorded yet. Currently, the scheduled date is, wow, I almost said November, December 19th. So keep your eye out. And one thing I will just share with you all as a group is internally, we're working on taking all of these trainings throughout our multiple seasons and providing little toolkits and guides about how to just share these resources with your giving circle or collective giving group members. So as always, thank you all for joining today. I'm going to turn off my camera, or not my camera.